Architectural drafting is different than the sketching that we have done in the previous exercise. Previously, we just kind of looked at the proportions of the building, we kind of studied it, and tried as best as possible to replicate the site plan and the elevations. When you go and you try to draft the project up, first of all, you're going to use what are called hard lines, lines where you use a straight edge to make sure that they're as sharp as possible. The other thing you're going to do is try to draw them to scale, which is to say the drawing will be representative of actual dimensions. So for example, I sent some poor intern out to the site, the virtual site, to virtually measure the size of this building, and they found that the dimensions of the building are 35 feet by 18 feet. Now, we can measure that with a tape measure in the real world, but we need to shrink it down. So every foot in the real world is going to be equal to 1/4 of an inch in our paper world. We're thus going to shrink it down to a scale where 1/4 of an inch equals a foot. And this is a standard architectural scale. Of course, I wish in a perfect world we were doing things in metric so that we could just change the decimal place and didn't have to deal with base 12 inches and all that, or base 3 yards. But that's the world we are given, so we will follow with that. So let's start, and I think what we will find when we take these measurements and draw them up accurately, that perhaps our sketches are not as accurate as they seem to be. For instance, the typical thing is that the proportions may be slightly off in the way we sketched it, or things like roof angles, which are notoriously hard to capture when drawing just a sketch. Yeah, we're just standing there looking at the building in perspective. When we draw it accurately in elevation, it's going to, I'm sure, look a tad bit different. Let's begin with a grid that is a 1-inch square grid. There are dark lines representing each inch and lighter lines representing each 1/4 inch. Now, in scale, each of these individual lines is 1 foot. And what we can do, we can generate a drawing fairly quickly using this 1 foot square grid. Now, taping the grid down to your drawing is no small task. I use my architect scale, which we can use for actually measuring drawings. But in this case, we're going to start with the easy thing, which is just flatten out your drawing. And off screen, I'm putting down some tape to really tighten this drawing up. I also have brought in an expert with long fingernails to scrape the tape and make it stick. My tape is not particularly sticky. Then I'm going to take 1 sheet of clear print. That's a drafting vellum. And I'm going to tape it down on top of this grid. This is nice heavyweight paper. And again, I can use my architect scale to flatten it out and then tape it down nice and tightly. As before, the place to start is the floor plan. And we will start it right in the middle of our big sheet of drawings. And it's a matter of just studying the images here, the dimensions, to figure out what the overall size is. And we'll start in this upper right corner drawing lines and see how well we can generate the plan. The way to start is to take the overall outline dimensions of the floor plan, which looks to me like it's 18 feet by 37 feet, and we'll transfer that to our gridded paper. And to do that, I'm going to start here and kind of in the middle of the sheet. We're going to end up with drawings that look very similar to our sketch plans. And I can actually count each of these little squares is 1 foot, or 4 at a time. So I know that that's 4, 8, 12, 16, 17, 18. And I'm going to use my light 2H pencil to get me down to this point. I'll make a little mark so I know where to go. And I'll just draw a light line. Now, I'm just transferring the dimensions right now. I'm going to hard line these in later on. And the same with the 37 foot dimension. I'm going to go 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32. And then, let's see, oh, that's 36. 37 is right here. I'll just draw my line. And again, I'm going to use my best line drawing technique always. Even though this is really just an underlay, we're going to layer back on the other dimensions. Then I can come in, and again, these are essentially construction lines. I can draw in my rest of my box for my site plan. And there you go. You have a scaled outline. Now there are some subtleties that will require looking at the dimensions more carefully in the plan. And I'm going to transfer those one by one over to the sheet to get the outline of the floor plan and also the location of the walls underneath these roofs. We are drawing really from way above, so this is a roof. The other thing to notice is that there are, in the plan dimensions that we measured, that there are some assumptions we have to make. And I know you shouldn't really make assumptions. You shouldn't assume, because you know what that makes out of you and me. But sadly, in architecture, we have to assume that walls are going to be about 6 inches thick, and then the overhang of the roof is also going to be about 6 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer all those dimensions. So you can see we have got the outline of the building here, which is 6 inches in from the outer wall, okay, or from the roof. And then we've also got the deck outlined here, again based on the fieldwork measurements. Finally, there is a planter box, which is 2 feet in dimension width, and it runs the length of this side of the building. So we're done, right? Well, not so fast. This time we're going to hardline in the plan using, and we're going to start with our heavier pencil, but this time we're going to use a T-square and we're going to use a triangle. And what these will allow us to do is make nice sharp lines. So first of all, I'm going to take my T-square and line it up against the line that is the outline of my roof. And that's going to be my darkest line. Now, if you're not familiar with hardline drafting, the lines are going to come in a little bit darker than when you just do them by hand. Now, you'll also want to remember that I did all these construction lines, but you will want to think about, well, where is the actual roof? In this case, here's the roof. These are just construction lines here. And I'm just going to take my hard pencil and go over each of these lines using my best line drawing technique. And remember what those are. Those are keeping your wrist locked so that as you draw, you get a very consistent line weight. And also rotating the pencil after every line so you get a nice sharp point. And finally, striving to have all lines in the plan equal in terms of line weight and quality. And I usually make the ends a tad darker. The other thing you might want to consider, I'm left-handed and I tend to smudge. So I may start with my my parallel rule here, my T-square, on this side, so that as I draw, I avoid dragging the T-square across it and dragging my fingers. But others of you may find the right to left style is easier. Now that I've drawn most of my horizontal lines, a few words of advice. One, I tend to press fairly hard on my pencil, so I'm going to blow the little bits of graphite off my page. And I'm left-handed, so I'm a smudger at heart. If you have your brush, you can just brush them off. You can also use your hand, but I would avoid that. I already have some schmutz on my hand. The other thing is holding your T-square tight against the edge of the table. Obviously, I'm using only 2 hands. So it's a little trick because as I move my T-square, I'm also using my thumb to kind of hold the T-square tight to the table as I drag it along. The other thing is I'm using my grid lines to help me. Conveniently, all the field work came in with either 6-inch or 1 foot even measurements. So it's really easy to figure out where 6 inches is. It's just in the middle of this grid line. So I'll just come in. I will also make my dashed lines I'll try to make each individual little line a little darker at the ends, and then of course I want them to meet when they get to the other end. And then you'll just have to try to understand your lines that you drew as reference lines, and then come in and fill in all the rest. And don't worry about erasing those construction lines underneath. You see how sometimes my final line doesn't exactly line up with where the initial construction line is? That's okay. Drafting is more a process of layering than anything else. You want your initial construction lines to help you know where the drawing is going to go, but then you'll come back in with much harder lines later on. The last step is I'm going to go over the outline of the building with a nice heavy pencil, probably my trusty 2B or maybe even 4B if I'm feeling I need a little boldness here. Now, as you can see, I did not go all the way to the edge where this planter is, and the reason is that this is beyond, the roof is closer to us. So having that nice dark outline over the edge of the roof, and I left one out, that really gives us a sense of depth. It's actually called a depth cue. And leaving this lighter is going to help us to read. Now the last part is you can use a light pencil to add in some of the details. For example, there's an edge to this planter, and I can just kind of estimate in that case. I don't need to measure quite as precisely. And then there are fun things that you can do, kind of draftsman's choice. If I wanted to say put in some plants, I could come in with a light pencil and say draw some little squiggly plants. Everybody has their own favorite way to draw plants. And this is optional, but after drawing all these crisp, hard lines, these soft plant lines are kind of a nice way to relax your wrist, which is probably getting tired from drawing. Drawing the south elevation is going to be very similar to the way we did it when we sketched it. However, now that we have a drafting table all set up, we can use our T-square to transfer some of those lines instead of just dragging our hand like we did when we were sketching it. And I would recommend starting on the left and just making your way across, pulling those lines, those construction lines down as you go. And I'm going to put the bottom of my elevation down here, right at the bottom of my sheet, just to give me enough space. I don't know exactly how big this is going to be. So again, I'll just draw my nice little lines. Also note that the roof and the edge of the walls are in slightly different positions. There is a roof overhang. This line represents the edge of the wall, so I'll just draw it per normal. And even things like the edge of the wooden deck, I can transfer those lines down. And of course the joints in the roof, we don't want to miss those. Then we can either use our triangle, or I'll just take the whole T-square and transfer it over. I'll start with a nice line for the ground, and I'll just draft it right in there. You'll also notice I tend to spin my pencil as I draw on the T-square, and for some reason I find it easier to do against the T-square, but some of you may find it's easier to just rotate the pencil 90 degrees after every line. It's kind of a matter of preference. Anyway, now we're going to just take our elevation sketch and transfer those dimensions just by counting the lines on the floor plan. Now, some of them are going to be very easy to transfer. For example, the height of the base, the top of the foundation, is going to be right here at 1 foot off of the ground. And then we can go up and go 13 feet, which is about here, for the bottom of the roof. And then the top of the roof is 4 feet above that. Now, I haven't drawn my construction lines quite high enough, and I am getting pretty close to the plan, but you can see it. In all likelihood, this is going to fit. There are other dimensions in the field work, but as you might note, we haven't redone every dimension. I'm accounting for the fact that I'm starting with plan, so I didn't need to measure every single line on the south elevation. I really only needed to get those dimensions, which I didn't have previously. So you can see I have kind of constructed a very rough outline of the elevation. Then I'm going to want to come in with my nice heavy pencil again and do the outline of the building and all the elements that are in the middle. You'll also notice that some things are a little tricky to find. For example, the middle of this window has a mullion. How do I find that? Well, I could absolutely say, well, it's 7 feet wide. It's going to be 3.5 feet, which is right here. You can also draw the diagonals, and you'll get the middle of that window, and that's a way to do it. Very frequently, I would say 99.9% out of 100 times, you don't have all the dimensions from your field work. And that's when you're going to have to kind of make some assumptions. So I'll draw in the outer lines here and make this nice. Now, we have a good outline here. I've drawn in a couple of steps, which are very nice. And there are a few things that we're going to need to add where we really don't know the dimension. And it's very hard to measure because they're at an angle. One of them is the top of the roof here is going to have a visible edge to it, the line of essentially the gutter along the edge of the roof. We're just going to have to estimate that based on what it looks like and some logic, which is to say roofs are usually a little thicker than walls. So we'll draw that in. The other thing is the skylight. We don't have any dimensions for that whatsoever. So we'll have to draw it in. Now you might say, well, it looks like it's even all the way around. But it's actually not. It is going to look like it's closer to the top and bottom edge. And I'll have to remember to draw it up here on the roof plan. Totally left that one out. Other things that we have assumed are that things like the overhang of the wall from the foundation is a couple of inches. I used 6 inches because it's a nice round number. That's a pretty big overhang, probably just a couple of inches. And then you can see here, as long as you can, the overhang of the roof is visible, then it should look correct. I'll just go in and finish out here, but there are, with a heavier line weight to draw the outline, maybe I'll draw some fun plants freehand. Finally, when you have lines that you need to erase, you need to use something called an eraser shield. And these lines that I drew for the stairs, I forgot that there's 3 steps at 6 inches, but they have to step in from each other. So I'll want to erase this little line using my eraser shield. I love these little devils because they are so good at making up for mistakes. And the way it works, there's holes in the eraser shield. You put it over the thing you want to erase, hold it tightly, and then you vigorously erase with your eraser. And if you didn't use too soft a pencil, you should be able to pretty successfully erase it. I'm not worried about all the construction lines here. That's just part of the drawing process, the architectural drafting process. And there you have it, your beautiful south elevation. And again, as before, we are using our site plan, which we drafted so carefully. Now we can pull these dimensions down. And the beauty of hardline drawings is that you can really get a very nice, precise correspondence between the drawings. Now, it is not, of course, 100% perfect because we're still drawing these by hand. However, and of course the field work is going to be suspect. but we can really get a pretty good approximation of what these elevations look like, and we can really study the proportions of the different elements. A few things you can do to clean up. One is you can erase some of the smudginess. I tend to press very hard on my pencil, so I get a lot of smudges. Use your brush to clean this off, or to be very careful if you're using your hands. Also, if you have any stray lines that are really bothering you, you can erase those. Same with these lines that are slightly off but not totally imperfect. You can use your eraser shield to kind of come and clean those up a little bit. It's never going to be perfect, and again, you'll want to keep the drawings moving forward. I'm going to take my sheet, rotate it, and start with each of the other elevations using the dimensions provided. I'm not going to talk about each one as I draw, though, because that would be a very long video, but the process is exactly the same. Pull down dimensions for the roof, pull down narrower dimensions for the walls, and any other elements. I can also measure elements that I've drawn here in elevation. For example, the height of this planter, I can transfer that over to this elevation just by counting the number of lines. Now, one of the great drafting tools out there, besides our straight edge, is this adjustable triangle. And what I'm going to use it for, I have located the height and the horizontal position of the upper corner of the roof and the lower corner of the roof. Now, I could just kind of freehand those, but you never get it in just the right spot. What I can do is take my adjustable triangle, loosen the screw so that it adjusts, hence the adjustable part, and then I can angle it until it goes through both of those points that I indicated. And it does take a little bit of moving around, and I often find that because I have glasses and my eyesight isn't that good, they're bifocals, that I can help myself by closing one of my eyes, and that gets rid of a little bit of the perspective distortion. Then when I've got it just right, screw that down, and of course I'm making sure that everything is nice and tight here, and now I can draw the line, my construction line, that is the angle of my roof. And the great thing about that is I can save this setting if I wanted to, say, draw the width of the roof, which I know is about a foot. I can just measure off a foot using my little grid, or at least approximate it. Again, this stage of drafting is more about increasing our level of detail and precision, but we are not 100% detailed and precise. So this is pretty close to a 1 foot thick roof plane. Anyway, once I've got that angle, I can continue transferring over the dimensions from my field work and draw in the rest of the elevation like I did before. Now, before starting the next elevation, I've, of course, rotated my page here. You can also rotate your board, or you can stand up and go over to the next side. I will also sharpen all of my pencils. If you're using a sharpener like this, you're going to make a huge mess. So be sure to find a nice sharpener that has a little catchment tank to collect the shavings. The other thing you're going to want to do is make sure you have enough space. Now, I remember from my elevation there that it's about 18 feet. So if I start, say, here, I can measure up 4 feet, 8 feet, 12 feet, 16, 18. Boy, that works out nicely, doesn't it? I can fit that right in my sheet. If you didn't start your site plan right in the middle, you're going to be in trouble. That's fine. You can just lay down another sheet of paper on top of this one, either vellum or tracing paper. So let's transfer all our dimensions and then draft them up. For my final elevation, I'm actually going to take a little shortcut, the same one that I used when we were just sketching our plan. I'm trying to be a little more accurate though, and I traced over my other elevation, my west elevation. Now I've got the outline, kind of all the measurements, and I can of course mirror it, because as we learned when we did our sketching, this is the same elevation except, the opposite side of the building. Now I have all of my dimensions already kind of figured out. I just have to make sure I get the roofs going in the correct direction. And I measure in any new elements, like I believe there's a big window up here. Now, as you take a look at your drawing, there are a few finishing touches. You can add in tiny little details that give you a little bit more human scale. One thing that we can add is something like the frames around the windows. And I'll show you, it's just a very light line, so I use my 2H pencil and basically draw a little frame in there. Pretty much all windows are going to have some kind of frame, either an inset frame for like a punched opening, or for something that has a casing around it. You can also draw in these 3 dashed lines. That's the universal "I'm a piece of glass" symbol that is a graphic standard. And there's other little subtleties that you could add in. For example, this planter probably has a little top to it. And each of these steps that we can see in the distance also has kind of a piece of wood that's added in. Oh, I think I need another line here, because I can see that step in elevation. It's always tricky sometimes when you use my cheating method of drawing using the mirror image of the opposite elevation. You forget that there are these details in there. But you see how adding that second line in there just gives a tiny little bit of interest. On elevations where you have some siding that's visible, for example, on this elevation here, you're going to have to estimate the dimension of the siding. Now, I'm going to guess from the model they look like they're about a foot apart. I'm going to just use my lines here that are underneath to draw in some light siding lines. That seems a little far apart. Maybe I'll go with 6-inch exposure. That looks about right. Now, you can draw them all the way up. That's a lot of work. You can also kind of fade them out by just kind of drawing them so that they stop a little shorter each time. And I'll just pull up my sheet of paper so you can see what that looks like. That can be pretty effective too, especially if you have a whole side of the building covered in that. I might just fill them all in. I can also do the exposed roofing. Now, you have to be aware that in this particular building, the underside of this roof is actually this wood siding, but it's going to be a good deal closer together because it's at an angle. They're not exactly a foot apart. So what I may do is use this same technique to draw them in, but kind of fade it out. In fact, it's a very effective technique to just do it in the corners. And then for the roofing up here, you may try a slightly different technique so they look different. This is more of a shingly type of roof, so maybe you use your straight edge, but just as a reference, and you draw in a squiggly line so that they appear slightly different. In this case, once again, they are very close together, and there's so little here, I may just draw them all in. Again, you want to graphically communicate that these are different, and in this case, because I don't have a very steady hand, I have no trouble making these lines look a little bit different. And there you have it. Your elevation has a whole lot of detail to it, but it also has a correspondence to the other drawings in your set. The other item that you should add to your drawing is text. We should put little titles on these drawings, and I usually put my title in the lower right of the drawing. So you can see here's the edge of my drawing. I can just carry a line down from that. And I usually make my text about 1/4 of an inch tall. Now you can see here that there are lines already for me on my grid, and I'll put one more line in there at 6 inches as a guide. You don't have to use that, but I find that it helps make my lettering look really nice. I have a video that I've linked to that's out on YouTube that you can use to help you letter as well. But the basic idea is any vertical part of a letter, you're going to use a straight edge, and you're going to use these reference lines, top and bottom, to help you draw it. And then in anything curvy like a B or a P, you're going to use that middle line to help orient it. So in this case, I'll start with the letter S, which is just curvy. I'll make it the same height, one foot in scale. Now I'll use my straight edge to draw a very nice line for I. The T, of course, has a part that's not horizontal. I'll try to make that a nice angle, and then come in and use my straight edge for that vertical part. And same for the letter E. Again, trying to make it go exactly 1/4 of an inch. And then I'll draw in my angled pieces. There's all sorts of stylistic things that you can do at changing that angle, but I'm trying to match the angle for those letters that have one. And then I'll leave myself some space, of course, and then the letter P, L, A, and N. And there you go. You have the word site plan. I'll just give it a nice underline. And I tend to use a B pencil for my line weight, just because I have kind of a heavy hand. Some of you may find that you are not getting a dark enough letter, but it should be that medium line weight, more or less. I don't know why, but I tend to bear down a little bit more. I also save all my lettering for last, and a lot of this detail item, because otherwise it will start to smudge all over the place. So label all of your drawings. You'll also, in the lower right, you're going to want to put the date and the title of this sheet, which is something like Tiny House Drafted Plan and Elevations. One final detail we can add to our sheet of drawings is a title. I usually put it in the lower right, but you can put it at the lower left. And I also add a graphic scale. What that does is it has little 1 foot boxes kind of offset from each other, and then a 5 foot length of drawing here, and the scale of the sheet of drawings down below. And for clarity, you can even come in and put in a little indicator that these are each 1 foot. I'll draw those in using my lettering technique. These are 5 feet each. And again, this really helps you read the drawing and understand how big everything is without having to pull out your architect's scale, which we'll be using in our next exercise.